Good afternoon. Thank you for staying to the last slot. I greatly appreciate it. So my name is Jonathan Allen. I'm an enterprise strategist at Amazon Web Services. I want to start just with a little bit of my own personal career background. So before I joined Amazon Web Services, I actually worked for Capital One Bank for 17 years. Capital One obviously has and progressively adopted Amazon Web Services as its predominant cloud partner and has gone a significant way on that journey. In the last 3 years, as my tenure at Capital One, I was privileged to be Senior Director and UK CTO on that journey and learned an awful lot of lessons across people, process, and technology. And in 2017, I actually joined Amazon Web Services and now work as an enterprise strategist, sharing lessons around the world from our customers. And I'm privileged to have met over 200 individual organizations and helped them on their journeys. And many of them are obviously banks. And there is a vast array of financial institutions around the world now leveraging Amazon Web Services to really power and transform their business. Everyone from obviously Capital One in the top left-hand corner there, to FINRA, the markets regulator in America, through to DBS, National Australia Bank, SunTrust, Suncorp. There's a huge amount of companies here leveraging AWS and getting huge value. So why are so many banks moving to cloud? Well, firstly, regulation is actually a huge catalyst for change. When you actually look at a quote here from FINRA, we can be far more secure in the cloud and achieve a higher level of assurance at a much lower cost. That kind of really encapsulates the sentiment from these leaders. And here a quote from the DTCC. Cloud computing has reached the tipping point as the capabilities, resiliency, and security of services provided by cloud vendors now exceeds those of many on-premises data centers. So why is that? You know, when you look at the job of banks to comply with regulation, there's an awful lot of heavy lifting involved in traditional on-premises worlds. These are the certifications that Amazon Web Services has achieved. So as a regulated institution, things like ISO, SOC compliance, PCI DSS compliance, these really matter. And the ability to leverage key services that have already achieved this compliance standard is a huge and differentiated lifting remover. And then we have things like the Compliance Center, where banks can easily and straightforwardly consume and get access to the data that's relevant for them for compliance in certain regions. Then, of course, availability. Massively, massively important to every enterprise out there, but especially banks. Now, if like me, years ago, you would look at charts like this and be a little bit like, wow, you know, this is a lot of nines, it's never ending, lots of promises on individual components to get certain elements compliant. Have you ever actually looked at what happens when you put these elements in a data center in serial, the maths? In a traditional data center, this is the mathematical formula. And as you add more components in, the actual downtime does not look very good. You know, 3 days, 16 hours when you've put these things in serial, that's not brilliant. This was a lesson that Amazon learned many years ago. This is one of the fundamental reasons why our region model has multiple availability zones within it. When you actually place an availability zone with the services duplicated within it, the equation changes dramatically. And actually, when you have 3 of these availability zones in parallel, look what can happen to the availability here. This is a dramatically different position. So the ability for enterprises, not just banks, to actually deploy their data and their application services across availability zones is really transforming their availability. And you even have regulated institutions now deliberately choosing to shut down individual AZs to understand and test proactively what's going to happen. So Santander's Open Bank CEO spoke at the Madrid Transformation Day last year about how they deliberately shut down availability zones to test their availability. This is a transformation for enterprises in the availability posture. Then, of course, security threats. Banks are natural and obvious targets, attracting the worst type of cyber criminals. And keeping up with that bar that's always moving is a real challenge. So leveraging the security strengths of Amazon Web Services, where security for us will forever be job zero, will forever get the lion's share of investment. We will not hesitate to slow down on features and move resource into security if that's not where we think it needs to be. And when you look at security and you look at the shared responsibility model, AWS is here responsible for the orange elements, where we look after the physical elements, protecting the data centers, the availability zones, the regions, the CloudFront locations. And of course, customers want to make sure that they can protect their data, that they say what, when, and how this is accessed. This is the blue element of the diagram. Now, that can be a conversation for customers of how they do that. But when you look at this large swathe of tools that Amazon Web Services provides here, moving from the left with comprehensive identity and access management, through to guard duty, which will proactively alert you to things that don't look right, through to DDoS protection, through to the key management service, where you can leverage that to encrypt your workloads. These tools provide customers with the security assurity they're looking for. And then, of course, I have this conversation about fintechs emerging and the threat this poses. I would politely argue that fintechs aren't disrupting banks. The customer expectations are of what we want and how we want to handle our financial transactions and our financial health. And compounded with that, bank yields have been consistently low for the last few years. And of course, banks, like any enterprise, are looking to run drastically more efficiently and drive their costs down for infrastructure. So as I've gone around the world, talked to these financial institutions, I'm very often asked, what are the 10 top learnings that you've gathered on the journey? I want to share with you them now. Lesson 1, keep it simple. There are so many choices available now. When you truly look, though, in my experience and with the organizations I've spoken to, really there's 3 things they're looking for. The first is security. The second thing is reliability. The third is feature sets. So keep your choices simple that you make available in your organization. It can exponentially compound quickly, so make your choices simple. And here, obviously, Capital One chose AWS as their predominant cloud infrastructure partner, keeping it simple. So the second thing I see going on is not moving to agile fully. So for many years, we've been worrying about the perception of lock-in. And it's really easy to understand that when you consider how some historical software vendors have engaged with their customers on licensing orders. I would actually argue that this is actually how we lock things in traditionally in enterprises. We have this waterfall design of delivery that sometimes can take years to deliver, from scope all the way through to delivery into support. I would say when you're going through that and have cemented your decisions in place for years, that's the lock right there at the end going in, because everybody's like, I can't change anything now for 3 or 4 years. We see it really radically changing, though, with organizations adopting these heterogeneous, multi-skilled teams that can leverage the software APIs available in cloud, and then they're able to drop in much smaller increments of change. If they want to change a type of technology they're using, It's really just a sprint and a thought and an execution for that team to transform themselves. So really, look to move to agile. Really challenge yourself. Look to move to guardrails, not gates. How can you blend these skills to really leverage these software APIs? The third thing is when I see some enterprises and banks treating cloud as just a project. Now, for those of you that may have read the great book Accelerate by Nicole Fosgreen, Jez Humble, and Gene Kim, this is a fascinating read, as they've taken a lot of data from a lot of organizations around the world. And when you look at one of the key findings in there, they have this concept of low performers, medium performers, high performers, and these elites. These are the organizations that are delivering significant more features and have significant lower downtime and significantly faster recovery time from any outages. And when you look at them in the report, and this is the State of DevOps Report 2018, they are 23 times, teams that adopt essential cloud characteristics are 23 times more likely to be elite performers. Now, Capital One also worked with the State of DevOps report, and it's worth noting that 4 deploys per day is a conservative estimate when comparing against companies such as Capital One. So moving away from maybe releasing 3 or 4 times a year to releasing many times a day. So how do you do that? How do you not just treat this as a project? So again, here is an interesting stat on the elite performers. 46 times more frequent code deployments, 2,500 times faster, 7 times lower change failure rate, 2,604 times faster time to recover from incidents. That last one's amazing. So when you're moving forward as a bank, not treating it as a project is really important, and actually engaging with the leadership team, incredibly important. Having a single-threaded leader, normally, and obviously in regulated institutions, you typically have 4 lines of defense. A first-line leader, maybe a CIO, CEO, CTO, COO, then followed by normally the risk function, maybe an audit function, and finally the regulator. These 4 lines of defense are broadly similar around the world. Well, having the single-threaded leader, who is a first-line leader, actually staring into this and going, I'm going to make a bold goal. Really important. So in National Australia Bank, you saw them do a 30 application move in 50 days. That's a bold goal to accelerate their progress. And for those of you that were here earlier on, you may have heard Paul from National Australia Bank talk about their journey. So declaring this bold goal is super important, and bringing together a cloud leadership team that has procurement people in there. Because the public cloud contract is a little different. It is pay as you go. It's very different. Bringing in legal into that conversation so they can understand that paradigm. Bringing in, of course, the Chief Information Security Officer. Ideally, the CFO, of course, coming in, because you're moving away from these very long, capital-intensive investments to now pay as you go. It's a different way. So yes, your financial analyst should be there. The head of infrastructure, really important. They have a crucial role to play in the transformation. A head of delivery, if one exists. The engineering function, if it's part of your delivery function. The risk and audit leaders, again, from those different lines of defense. And of course, human resources. We're going to be changing how people work. And particularly if you're moving from an on-premise, highly skilled on-premise team to cloud, there's going to be a change curve those folks are going to go through. This team should come together and meet weekly, or even twice a week. And you know what? They're going to have a lot of questions. Totally natural. Capture every single question and eventually answer it. There's a priority order. And one of the best ways I've seen leadership teams accelerate their journey is with an executive briefing, either here in Singapore or traveling to Seattle. And during that executive briefing, you can really dive deep into things like the cloud adoption framework, the well-architected framework, the migration acceleration program, which brings together thousands of learnings of customers that have migrated to AWS available there as a program, along with a whole breadth of topics that you might want to dive deep on. The other thing I've seen work incredibly well is establishing principles at this level. So if you want to move to a model like you build it, you support it, the leadership team needs to be brought into that. Very often I've seen leadership teams have their individual opinion of what they're trying to achieve, but that alignment through principles is incredibly powerful. For those of you that may have heard about the Amazon leadership principles, which of course customer obsession is our first one, that's how we get broad agreement in hundreds of thousands of employees. I can go to any Amazonian and talk about diving deep, invent and simplify, customer obsession. These are our leadership principles. They're really important to us. Lesson 4, there is no compression algorithm for experience. Here a quote from Rob Alexander, the global CIO in Capital One. The hardest part of this transition is really a talent transformation. And again, comprehensively trained organizations are far more likely to succeed. This has got to be extremely front of mind for the leadership team. Now, in my experience, training, though, is not the be-all and end-all. When you look at this frozen middle that sometimes occurs, training is the tip of the iceberg. And what I had to learn on my own journey was actually what really motivates most of us is incredibly important. So what does motivate us? So there's 3 things for those of you that may have read the Daniel Pink book, Drive, which is an amazing book that he talks about. So there's autonomy, there's mastery, there's purpose. These things are all really unique and personal to us. We like the ability to do something when we want to do something. Mastery, we want to be really good at something and we want to be known for being the expert in that thing. Doesn't matter what that thing is, typically. And purpose, we want to know that what we do is going to matter to the business or to whatever we put our efforts to. This is where we typically get motivation from. But do you know what? When you're moving from on-premise to cloud, you're about to mess with all 3 of those things. So really taking the time to connect with everybody who's going on this journey, to offer them multiple mechanisms to reskill, not just train, to reskill, really important. Now, we have thousands of Amazon Web Services partners around the world. One of the things I did on my journey was work with a particular partner, in this case CloudReach, which is a born-in-the-cloud provider. And I brought in one of their experts, dropped them into my first platform team, my cloud platform team, and they did pair programming. Pair programming where I've got 1 machine, 2 keyboards, 2 mice, 2 keyboards, and 2 individuals are now working together to build infrastructure as code from their machine to the cloud. I know personally, if I sit on a training course, I will not ask an embarrassing question, right? Because I don't want to look embarrassed. But I will ask if I'm next to somebody who really is competent and I don't know, I'll actually work with them really seriously to build that code. Multiple mechanisms to reskill, incredibly important. And here's a top tip, and it was mentioned by Paul from National Australia Bank in the previous session. Look to get to 10% of your technology folks certified, not just trained, certified. When you do the training, book that exam, because this is where I see huge inflection points of adoption and success. When the AWS tools become like a common vernacular in your business, when people talk about what an S3 bucket is, the objects within it, what an account is, what a VPC is, what encryption looks like, you'll be amazed by the rapidity that you can move at. We're no longer waiting for teams to deliver services for us. We can procure it. If a team has written code on how to do something, we can take it. It's developed by our enterprise. We can reuse that code. So get to this 10% bar of people certified. Incredibly powerful. And then you get this halo effect. Many organizations start out at the start of the journey wanting to recruit, and I think Paul said it at National Australia Bank, they were looking to recruit thousands of people. They did not exist. But actually, when you reach this inflection point, experience has shown me that you actually do attract talent who want to work on AWS Cloud at this point. Incredibly important. Lesson 5. Get the risks and control balance right. Now, obviously, reskilling, crucial to helping with this. For those of you that have seen the customer example earlier in the day, where they really looked at using a partner, an AWS config, to really get the right balance of detective controls in place for them, and preventative controls, and directive controls, but get them to be appropriate for them, really important. Now here's another model, and this is based off a principle attached. When you've got these small teams that are able to leverage software APIs, of course you want to trust them, but in a regulated institution, you've got to verify what they're doing. So this trust but verify concept is incredibly important. Now one of the things Capital One has done is to actually develop their own open source tool called Cloud Custodian, where Cloud Custodian can look at an account. You can configure your guardrails in a YAML file. Incredibly powerful. Lesson 6, thinking on premise. It's totally natural when you've done things for many years in a certain way to think that you have to redo them in that same way in cloud. There's a little acronym here called YAGNI. You aren't going to need it. Getting your DNA right so you can move to cloud at speed is incredibly important. So just because a control ran a certain way to support on-premise, or something was done a certain way, doesn't mean it has to be done that way in cloud. Just asking and working with your solutions architect or a partner of actually how is this done is actually something many people forget to do, and try and duplicate how they've done something on premise, whatever that is. I've seen so many different things. And then they realize they've spent 3 months building to replicate something on cloud, where there's normally a service or a really simpler way to do that in cloud, and they could have saved an awful lot of time. So really be aware of this acronym. You aren't going to need it. Really helps. Ask questions. And number 7, thinking regulation is a barrier. Again, as I spoke about earlier, we have a lot of help in this regard. Regulation is not a barrier. Regulation is an enabler. When you've got things like CloudTrail that can track this user activity and API usage, it's actually never been more clear to understand what happened, when, by who, at a certain time. Lesson number 8, trying to build the perfect. Perfect is the enemy of good. I love this quote from Voltaire. I have seen, sadly, some enterprises spending many years trying to get every widget and everything absolutely perfect by losing it. By using AWS Cloud, you can actually get to, and I have seen many enterprises and regulated institutions get to production workload in 90 days. Of course, security has got to be absolutely right. Of course, reliability has got to be absolutely right. But engineers and developers, and I put myself in this bucket, will take and will always be refining and always finessing things. Of course they can, and of course they want to. But knowing when it's good enough is really important. Number 9, overthinking migration. So this next slide, I can sometimes spend entire hours just with leadership teams discussing this. So how do you migrate? It can be a little overwhelming when you've got hundreds of applications, thousands of workloads you want to move. But we have a very straightforward decision tree that can break it down for you, and it works, and it's part of the Migration Acceleration Program. So I'm just going to step through it. Firstly, you can rehost workloads really straightforwardly. Not only do we have tooling available, but our partners have tooling available to rehost your workloads. Rehosting being I'm moving the operating system and the application or data store straight onto EC2. It is the fastest way to migrate. What if you don't want to take the operating system? What if you want to change your data store? Completely understandable that people want to get database freedom. How do you do that? Well, again, taking your application off its existing operating system, using OpsWorks to help. Maybe going from WebLogic to Apache Tomcat for your application. Maybe going from a Oracle or MySQL data store to Postgres or MySQL on Aurora or DynamoDB. You can use the database migration service to do this. You can even use the schema conversion tool to help you on that journey, to identify any stored procedures you may have, to look at any SQL mismatches. Really important. And again, there's both tools from Amazon Web Services and from our partners to help on that journey. Thirdly, do you want to repurchase your existing workloads? So are you doing something in your data center that you actually do not need to do anymore? Maybe you want to use Workday or Salesforce or something else from our marketplace where we've got well over 4,000 products from over 1,000 ISVs listed in there. That's available to you. Do you want to move to software as a service and some of those functions? Incredibly important model. Fourthly, do you want to refactor? Do you want to take something that you've built previously and make it totally cloud native, looking at serverless technology? Typically, this delivers the lowest cost with some of the highest availability. I would say use this one selectively for what really differentiates your business. Use it selectively. And finally, retain and retire. So I have seen some organizations, regulated institutions, closing their data center using a combination of rehost, replatform, refactor, repurchase. But what about those other workloads, those non-x86 workloads? You've probably got to refactor them in time, but you might not have enough money or resources or focus to do that right now. Well, I see some companies choosing to relocate them, certain systems, securely into their connectivity partner, like Equinix, for example. Almost like a holding pattern while they get time to refactor. And of course, retire. Customers are always amazed how much they find in their data center that they actually don't need anymore. These are systems looking after systems for their on-premise. So overthinking migration. And the final lesson, not optimizing your operating model. So very often one of the first questions I get when I speak to customers is, what does my target operating model need to look like to go to cloud? Of course, the answer to this is incredibly multifaceted. The answer is probably whatever organizational model fits your business and can be accepted, but we do see some patterns strongly emerging. So if you take a bucketing scenario, I've got sustain, I've got optimize, I've got grow. What are the differences? You are not going to take all of your applications and immediately go to enterprise DevOps. You're going to have applications which are going to be staying around for a while. That's sustain. You're probably going to have some applications that you're going to re-platform and you're going to make tweaks. You're going to do what a minimum viable re-platforming looks like. And you potentially could, using Cloud Ops on top of an Amazon machine image, actually move this to almost a distributed DevOps model. And finally, for those new things you're refactoring, you can probably go all the way to those heterogeneous teams, trust but verify with the right guardrails. What does this look like? So you've probably got application engineering, application operations, creating a cloud platform engineering team, maybe a cloud platform operations team per division. Super useful in that first model. What about the second model? Well, application engineering can start to merge over with operations. And actually, cloud platform engineering is probably still needed in this model. What about the final one, grow, decentralized DevOps? Actually, this team now becomes pretty self-sufficient. All right, their demands from maybe a central team to do things for them are much lower. And we see states. We see the first one as transitional, the second and third as strategic. But what if you can't find the skills? A common problem. This is where AWS managed services can really help you go fast, can really help you with that bold goal, can really help you do maybe even a 50 and 50 migration, which we see so many customers going for your business. So what does AWS look like? So this is where Amazon Web Services come in with a team dedicated to help you with change management, access management, security management. We have those templates to go really fast. And actually, when you break it down, you can actually map that really interestingly onto your migration methodology as well. So actually, we can see this sustain being part of rehost. We can see this optimized path being part of replatform and repurchase, and that grow, those things that really differentiate your business, those new builds, that refactoring. This is where you get to that decentralized DevOps. So, 10 lessons. This is the first 5. This is the second 5. Thank you very much.